So we have the tree protection areas. You more than likely will have them on your site, and having them clearly defined and protected with a physical barrier, usually it's high-vis fencing, that you would want to have it on here to keep equipment and vehicles out of it, or when they're doing clearing, to keep the route protected as well. So not having this there puts you in danger of potentially having it potential damage to the tree itself.
Here you see the clearing limits of the project. Going down the hillside, protecting from waters of the state. But you don't see many clearing limits along the road here.
So we'll be doing the construction entrance for the inspection for current activities. We have, as you can see, that they have modified it. It looks like they was doing work on the curb access, and so they modified this. This does not meet standards for the construction entrance. So all of the finer materials will need to be removed out of it, as well as the quarry spalds coming into it are impacted heavily with sediment and will need to be removed and reapplied or sifted out to address the existing needs. After we go through the construction entrance, we'll go out to the track out, potential track out. We'll look at the roadway coming off the site with indications. There's the fine silts and sediments that are leaving the site. Not too heavy right now, but there is heavy potential for it in the future. We will need to address this, keep it swept on site. Remember that any indication that there is track out onto it means your BMPs on site are not functioning as designed or intended to do so.
As you look out there, Rick, what do you see? The quarry spall there, what's happening in the middle right there?
If we could go in, it looks as though what we have here is just a combination of material being removed and replaced onto it. You can see the filter fabric coming up from the rockway, which needs to be sifted out and removed into there. There's either loading, dumping issues, as well as tracking off outside of the construction entrance. Additional BMPs, as in silt fence or a construction fence, put along the edges of it for the full length of the construction entrance would be beneficial on both sides to force your equipment coming onto your site to drive through the construction entrance and have its design intended purpose.
And as you look right here, Rick, why did he put this? This doesn't seem to be consistent with quarry spall. Why is this here instead of it all being quarry spall?
The material on hand, it looks like this was just material on hand that they just added after the fact to try to protect the rolled curb. If you could look at this side, the corner here, it actually did design as they intended it to. If they would have used the proper material with proper bedding and the plating as well, you wouldn't have the broken out concrete in the corner here that you see, or and the track out issues that we have going on with this site. So here we are in the outfall checks on the site. You can see the outfall. There's newly installed riprap on the large side as well. It'll act as a energy dissipation onto it. As we come down to this, the rocks are so large, it's allowing the water to actually channelize through, and you can see some indication of the sediment really beginning and moving the finer silts onto that. Graded in this direction is covering more than 50% of the silt fencing there. The requirement is 50%. It's required to be removed and to allow the silt fencing to act as it's designed and intended to. And we'll go on to the next one over here. So we have the silt fencing here. They have a connection point. If you look at it, we pull it up in that it wasn't even buried at all, and that they use zip strips to hold the two sections together, which it will not be adequate. The slope is actually coming this direction, which will actually force it to go in between it where we don't want it to go to. And the overlap should be the opposite direction with secure burial into the ground as designed, and that to prevent this from coming out. A lot of times what you'll have is they'll need to get in here for some other activity that gets cut and it doesn't get replaced properly. So when you're doing the inspections, you want to look for these type of activities and have them corrected as needed. So we got the silt fence. Looks like something penetrated it. It could be just debris falling down the hill slope and knocking it out, or just equipment and that would knock it out. We need to repair this area and to ensure that it continues to function properly. The soil is starting to build up. It's an indicator that work will need to be done in the near future to prevent that one out. So you might want to take note of that in your reports and on your logbooks. So we have the ditching activities going on the outside of the sidewalk, which would be in the right of way, questionably outside the project boundaries in that. This one needs to be addressed at this side. As you can see, right at the road edge, it's cut down at least 6 inches onto there. Any runoff that comes off to that side will actually run off and resuspend your sediments in this gravel here. It'll all convey down and bypass the conveyance system now. Now you have a higher potential of the larger amount of water coming, picking up more sediment and causing pollution off-site. So in addressing this one, stabilizing it would better, cold patching it, something is necessary to prevent and control this measure. So with all work to be done to it, with the exposed soils, they need to be covered depending on the time of year you're working on it, whether it's 2 days in the wet season or the 7 days in the dry season in Washington. You want to have your exposed soils covered completely. With the straw, if you're using straw, you need to cover it 2 to 4 inches to where no exposed dirt's happening. The native vegetation and existing vegetation they're utilizing here is the best option you can have because it's already there and it's free. We pan over a little bit more, you can see that there is exposed soils with some sparse vegetation that needs additional measures. There is some indication of some straw being applied, but it's not nearly as enough that is needed to manage the soils as it needs to. And we look over to this side over here, we have piles exposed in that. Currently it's not raining, but we have that working window in the 2 days, and so those piles should be covered. Those are gravel piles. The fines are still going to wash out. You're paying for this material and you're going to lose the fines and not be functioning properly. So covering those piles properly is where you're going to need to prevent costly and negative impacts associated with it. So we have some cold mix material, cold patching material, and recycled material all here in a pile. It's on site here, not covered, not contained in any way. It should be controlled and confined in an area that can protect it. And the material is quite expensive to have it just setting out and collecting the sediment and loading onto it. You could use it in another area to help stabilize your site more. And here it's just stockpiled, sitting, going to waste. So we have the slopes here. There was some attempt to put some straw down, but it's pretty sparse. You can still see lots of exposed soil. The vegetation is trying to come through, but it's not nearly enough to control it. As we move down here, you can definitely see that it's channelizing down, causing your rills into it and eroding it out. It continues down to this side, and you can see the silt fanning out into there, all the way to the actual silt fencing to where it's building up. You can see the stain line and siltation from it's picking up the sediment, and that is your last line of defense before it's leaving this site. And we're failing at this point. We need to address the upstream BMPs to correctly address the issues, and if we can stabilize that, we'll prevent this measure before it gets to it. The system has been installed and tied in, and we are now looking at, we don't have any catch basin inserts installed in this. Now this has a high potential because the next manhole down connects to a infiltration gallery, so any sediment that gets into this will directly impact that as well. So definitely a time to get inlet protection into all the catch basins on the project.
You definitely need the big rocks to stabilize channels and outlets.
So the equipment coming in and out of your sites in that could have a potential pollution source into it. As you can see here, we have a hydraulic leak that's actively leaking onto the ground itself with no BMP in place to protect this one. The soil needs to be removed and properly disposed of, and a secondary containment measure, as in a drip pan, something needs to be in place to there to keep it from happening in the future. So a lot of times the older equipment will come onto the site with no secondary containment or drip pads of any sorts under there. That's one note that you want to take during your inspection, is to check all the equipment coming on and regularly. Hydraulic leaks happen continuously. The older equipment will break down, and so having this as part of your inspection will be important. So we have a concrete washout here. You can see it's actively being used. There's quite a bit of standing water into there due to the lack of coverage onto this. We're here in the wet season. There's a lot of things that can be done with this one to improve it. It's at the front side of it, you can see the actual plastic starting to slough off. Pulling that back and re-armoring that one way into it. Creating a cover over the top of it to prevent the rainwater from getting into there, that you don't have to deal with the pH issues if you're containing and covering it. So simple idea, could be more effective covering it with either plastic or some material to prevent that water into there. Not having it so physically close to your construction entrance that the pH laden water can go in and be tracked right off site. So location is important and proper maintenance in this. This looks like another good rain event. We will be overflowing pH water out of the site. This is actively being used for vehicular traffic on there. The water line was placed into there. There's still vehicles going across it. You can see that they've placed the straw bales along to apply it, but it only applied to half of it. Now the bales are falling apart, and the BMP is rendered ineffective due to not being applied at all.
Overall project management is important. As you can see, just the visual appearance will give an inspector or the general public a real clear idea of what you care about. Clearly not enough straw. You see a lot of dirt, a lot of uncovered dirt. As everybody see the cars driving by, they definitely will form an opinion. And as the storefront says, hope is not a BMP.
Now, Marty and Jamie will explain what they look for during their inspections of biofilters or bioretention features, then bioswales, and finally, permeable pavements.
First thing you'll see as we walk up to a biofilter facility like that is there's not any standing water, which is always a good thing, which means that it's perking properly and infiltrating like it should be.
Stormwater that is captured in a bioretention or bioswale practice should completely percolate down from the surface within 72 hours after a rain event. If you do see water ponded for longer than that, inspect the soil. It may be that the surface is clogged with fine sediment. The soil does not contain the right mixture of sand, topsoil, and organic material, or that a layer of filter fabric is obstructing drainage.
We go to a bioretention system for BMP inspection. The primary thing I'll look for is just to make sure all the vegetation's still alive and looking healthy. I will also check for any bare spots where there might be some mulch that's been washed away. That might be something they might need to go and replace.
One thing I see right away here is that a lot of the base vegetation and the ground cover in this facility doesn't appear to be doing so well. The trees appear to be healthy. They've got blooms on them. Depending on the time of year you do these inspections, they might not be in bloom yet.
Vegetation management is one of the most critical and often overlooked elements of BMP maintenance. Some sites will have too little plant and mulch cover, while others may have become so overgrown that you can no longer even locate the practice. Ideally, the vegetation and mulch should be managed according to the original landscape plan, avoiding either of these extremes.
This right here is it's a pretty typical outfall into one of these facilities. There is a little bit of erosion right here at the outfall. They could probably stand to use stone or small riprap just to kind of keep that from eroding further. This here is what looks like the outfall. It's probably about a 4-inch PVC pipe. We'll have to check that against the plans here in a little bit. There's a small bit of erosion right here, nothing major. They could probably use to put a little stone through here just to kind of prevent this channel from washing out more.
Since stormwater flow gets concentrated at inlets and outlets, it is important to check these points for erosion. Left uncorrected, minor erosion can grow into major problems over time. A bioswale is essentially a long, linear version of a bioretention practice. Since it has many of the same components, inspecting a bioswale involves most of the same steps. Here's Jamie again.
Bioswale will also check to make sure that all the plant life that's supposed to be there is still healthy. When there's not very much vegetation, we probably ask the homeowner or the property manager to go back and replant some of it. We'll do the same thing. We'll check and make sure there's no serious erosion caused by high flows of water through the channel. Just make sure that there's no clogging there. Look for debris. Just make sure everything flows through the swale as it should.
In this particular bioswale, Jamie checked for structural problems and found an underdrain cleanout pipe with its cap missing.
Clean out here that doesn't have a cap on it. You know, it looks like water will be coming in the top of this before it gets down the swale. So that's something we might ask him to do as part of our inspection as well.
One of the other types of LID practices you may have to inspect is permeable pavement. There are many varieties, including permeable asphalt, concrete, and pavers. However, the inspection process is generally the same for each.
When we look at permeable pavement, we're looking really specifically for if there's anything that's clogging at the surface. We're looking at the voids between the paver blocks or in the voids of the concrete to make sure that there's no sediment that's accumulated there that would affect the infiltration rate into the system.
Some permeable pavement systems include an underdrain that collects and drains water below the pavement surface. Check the underdrain outlet pipe and any cleanouts that are present to make sure the system is not clogged. Look for any erosion at the outfall point. Finally, look for broken pavers, cracks, settling, or other signs of structural problems with the permeable pavement. Jamie, since you've had a lot of experience inspecting BMPs, what are your top tips for stormwater inspections?
Some tips for inspectors is just to be familiar with your site. You know, make sure you have the plan, make sure you know what type of BMP is there. Make sure that you've got a very comprehensive checklist. You go through your state standards or whatever standards you're using for your inspections to make sure you've covered all the things that should be done from a maintenance perspective. Be sure to check the outfall as well. That's a really important one. It's easy to forget about that. Sometimes you just see the features on the surface there, but you need to walk downstream and make sure that there's no problems at the outfall as well, and make sure everything's still flowing out of the system.
With any BMP inspection, documentation with notes and photographs is key. It is likely you will have to refer back to these for any follow-up action needed.